Hi everyone, it brings me enormous joy to be here today for my friend Amra over here looking beautiful. I know you'll all go out and buy this book and read it afterwards, so I'm not going to tell you how brilliant it is because I've said so on the cover with my endorsement. What I want to talk to you about today is what it means to be a real and genuine writer. The book we are launching today is actually, most of you won't know this, but it's actually the second of two books that Amra wrote in the course of 5 years. I say 5 years because 5 years ago, Amra approached me to ask if I would mentor her through an Arts Victoria grant. She was writing a memoir, she told me, and much of it would deal with the difficult subject of her mother's mental illness. The first book Amra wrote was about a 16-year-old girl, Senka, a strong and robust agricultural worker who has a baby and suffers what we would now call postpartum depression or psychosis. But of course, Amra doesn't use those terms because they didn't exist at that time and at that place. The story begins in the girl's native country, Bosnia. From the very first paragraph, I was hooked. Amra's images were so vivid and her language was so direct that we fell in love with this young teenager. And yet we also saw the life around her, the family friends witnessing her breakdown, the firstborn baby being taken care of back in the tobacco farm, the jealousy of her husband over having such a beautiful wife, and the honesty and humour. In Australia, Senka, or Fatima in this book, is admitted to hospital many times, and she tells her daughter one time, quite honestly, that the hospital stays were like a little holiday retreat from single parenthood. I didn't understand that then, but I do now, having 2 sons of my own. Amra said to me, when I was her mentor, she called me one evening and she said, "Look, please don't feel afraid to criticise anything in my manuscript, even spelling errors. I just want it to be the best book it can become, and I can really take it." Of course I knew she could because she's taken much, much worse in her life. But to be honest, there really wasn't much to criticise. And I'm sure Amra was initially very disappointed in me and my first mentor report in 2015 because it was only about 2 pages long and it only dealt with some of the themes, suggesting that she tell me more about some minor characters. That was it. Because a wise editor, my own, Chris Fike, told me once that his approach to editing was the same one as the Hippocratic oath that doctors take. Firstly, do no harm. And I knew I was dealing with a very special voice, a voice unheard of before in Australian literature. I don't think we can even compare it to some of the classics like Romulus, My Father, because this voice is raw and ragged at times. It's a female voice, but it's like a sharp rock with some precious healing stones inside. I've always liked, when you go to jewellery stores and you see the beautiful stones, but then on the display, outside they'll have a big rock that's cut through the middle so you can see where the stones come from and you can see the gems glittering inside the rock, but also the rock surrounding it. So you can see where the gem comes from, what protects it. And I like seeing that part of the rock intact because a child who has been through trauma is like that. They build a wall of resilience through direct, simple narrative and at times black humour. There's no bullshit about Amra's work, no fluffing around decorating the rock with chalk metaphors or mossy similes. There's no need to when there clearly is a gem inside. I was so moved by the first book Amra asked me to read over. It dealt with mental illness so profoundly and so compassionately. It was a love letter to her mother. In this first book, Amra's mother's voices and Amra's voices have equivalent weight, and their stories are intertwined in alternating chapters. But this is not the book that's published today. And this book today is testament to Amra's tenacity as a writer. Her agent wanted her to change some very significant things. Big publishers wanted some sort of overhaul. It lingered on the threshold of many publishing houses. And you know what? This didn't matter so much because Amra showed the book to her mother, and when her mother read it, she said to Amra, "You know me best of all. You have told my story. No one knows me better than you." And that was all that mattered, this singular audience of one, the person for whom the book was written in the first place, the person who gave the novel its heartbeat, Amra's extraordinary mother who is here today. Amra kept trying and trying with her memoir, and the book I'm launching today, 5 years after, is told from a very different voice, Amra's voice. It's a voice of a child and then a teenager growing up in Australia and then in Bosnia and then back in Australia, surviving poverty and the foster care system and the effects of living with a parent trying their absolute best with bipolar. Amra as a child was always at the whim of adults that loom over her or forget her or pull and push her in different directions. When I look at Amra's beautiful daughter, also here today, Sophia, I think I see a younger version of Amra because they look almost identical. She's cheeky, she's kind to babies and small children, she's whip smart, she's loyal, she's generous, she's defiant to unjust authority, and she's just delightful to hang around with. And I think that these traits, which appear so naturally and effortlessly in Sophia, were probably the same qualities that got Amra through her childhood, what endeared friends to her, made her navigate quite dangerous situations with adults and the foster system, and maintain her love for her family. I was amazed when I read Things Nobody Knows But Me. It is literally a different book from the one I helped mentor, but it is wonderful and not poorer for its difference. The first was the book Amra was meant to write. It was the book she had to get out for one person, her mother, and this second book is for the world. So I'd like to thank Transit Lounge for publishing this, because books like this are rare gems. I know because when I was a young adult, I actively sought out the books with difficult stories and dysfunctional families, and I could barely find any. I know this book will sit alongside Demet Deveroen, Maxine Beneba-Clark and Enza Gandolfino, 3 wonderful Western suburbs women who have been patiently writing for some for over decades before they got the wide recognition they deserved. Thank you for the Sun Bookshop for all the support you've given us from the onset. We love you being here and we just love you in general. We writers from the West never used to be considered real writers. Sure, we were ethnic writers or working class writers or creative writing dabblers because we have other jobs and we have maybe some kids and lives. We might teach or have other jobs, and we can rarely spend the luxury of hours using tweezers to inch every word in place. Sometimes we rain down buckets of words in the limited time we have, and then we have to go back with a sieve to collect the bits that fall off from the sides onto the floor. It's messy and ugly, and to this day, over half a decade of friendship, we've never even had the time to have a wine together, Amra and I, until today. So to finish up, what is a real writer? A real writer writes the story she was meant to tell for one specific and very special person only, and then has the courage and integrity and dignity to let it go. And then she gets up again and works her ass off to write this story for the world. A real writer is not afraid of criticism. A real writer has a life that is rich and full of meaning outside her writing. A real writer can also write romance fiction and reinvent herself as a writer named May Archer. A real writer teaches writing with a passion to some of the most disadvantaged students in Victoria without any hint of self-righteousness or remove. There is no middle-class home she retreats to every evening to discuss the tragedies of her students' lives in St Albans. There is a husband she jokes around with and a daughter they bring up without needing to shelter her from this whole ragged, woeful, beautiful and bizarre world. A real writer knows her audience and asks her students to help her pick her book cover. A real writer has tenacity and strength and heart and wit and enormous, awe-inspiring love for her characters. Amra, my friend, you were a real writer before any of your books were published. You do it for the love, and I cannot imagine a more loving tribute to your mother over here and to all the young people who definitely exist, whose lives are not easy, doing it rough just as you had in things nobody knows but me. Well, now we'll all know, and we'll be richer and better for it. Thank you, Amra.